Hi, this is Dr. Rodney Davis. I'm so happy to be with you in Bayambang City, Nueva Vizcaya, Philippines. Over the last 11 years that I've been in the Philippines and traveled to the Philippines, I can say that I've never been to Bayambang. I've been nearby in Quirino Province, Aurora Province, and Isabela, in Nueva Vizcaya, but never been to Bayambang City. And that's one of the things that I am planning to do in the future, is to visit your fair city. I'm looking forward to meeting you face to face one day. Now, I've taken some time to look at some pictures online about your region and your city, and it's just beautiful. And I hope that maybe next year when I return to the Philippines for some conferences and visiting friends, I'll have a chance to go there and visit for myself. But until then, we'll just have to rely on this video presentation for me to talk to you about procurement and record keeping. Now, the neat thing is I've got some videos set up for you so you can see me. Also, there's some auditory sessions, so you'll be able to look at a slide that has detailed notes on it for you. Diego will provide this video to you at the end of the conference. If you'll give him your flash drive or a CD, he'll make sure you get a copy of this. So let's go ahead and get started with the presentation. Managing Financial Resources, Procurement, and Record Keeping. The Right Stuff at the Right Time for the Right Reason at the Right Price by Dr. Rodney Davis. For the Philippine Professional Linkages from Various Disciplines Conference, August 25th through 27th, 2017 at Bayambang City, Nueva Vizcaya, Philippines. Now, the title of this presentation looks at procurement or purchasing, and record keeping. Two very broad topics that it will be hard to cover in just 30 minutes or so. But what I've tried to do is take these two broad topics and look at them in really what's necessary to procurement, why we do it, and then of course looking at record keeping. So there's going to be two parts to this presentation. Notice then that procurement, or purchasing, if you want to use a more informal term, deals with the acquisition of stuff, goods and services, products and services, things. So that's why I say it's the right stuff. Why is it the right stuff? Because it is stuff that the organization needs that has been aligned to the budget. We'll talk more about that in a moment. As well as at the right time. Now, we can spend our money at the beginning of the month and not have any to get us through the end of the month in our own personal finances. But as an organization, you can't afford to do that. You need to spread out the purchasing over the course of the fiscal year. And that's what we operate here on in the United States as a fiscal year. And usually it goes from October 1 through September 30th. And that is the way the federal government of the United States counts the fiscal year. In some states, that fiscal year may be June 1 through May 31. But typically, more and more organizations are aligning themselves to that federal fiscal year. So timeliness is important in procurement. Buying not only the right thing, what we need, but also at the time we need it. Instead of having to store it for months, buy it closer to when we need to use it. But also, a third part of procurement involves for the right reason. In other words, we're going back to that alignment with the vision or mission of the organization. There's lots of things that we can buy, but are we buying things that we really need or are going to help us do what we do in school? And finally, for the right price. Everybody likes a bargain. One of the reasons I love shopping in the Philippines is that you can always find a bargain. And my friends there will tell you, Dr. Esperon will tell you, I love to go to Divisoria or Tutuban in Manila. And I certainly stop at the bridge by Quiapo Church, because I love to buy my pasalubong for my friends here in the United States there under the bridge. All the carvings and all of the trinkets that you can buy there are just amazing. And of course, you can buy other things over at Divisoria. So everybody likes a good price.
And it's important then, because we are dealing with public money, tax money, or money that comes from the government, that we get the best price that we can so that we can efficiently use it. And really that's what this presentation is going to cover in the next 30 minutes or so. Now, of all the leadership tasks that you must perform, being a school principal, I think that procurement or purchasing is probably the most important. Now, you have to organize things, and you have to organize people, and make sure teachers are teaching, and that students are learning, and school is happening, and a lot of things come across your desk as a school leader, and there are constantly meetings for you to attend. You must plan for the future and replacing teachers who may be leaving and or new teachers that need to be hired so that you can meet the needs of the students, as well as evaluating and staffing. All of these tasks, which are common to every leader, whether it is a school or some other kind of organization, those are important. But I think the purchasing is probably the most important, and simply because here is the area where many leaders have a downfall. It's in the area of spending money, because they spend it incorrectly. And you'll hear in the news here in the United States, even from time to time, leaders who had access to an organizational credit card or an organizational account who used it inappropriately. They spent money on things that they were not supposed to do. Senators and congressmen who spent government money on personal trips or transporting their family from place to place, purchasing things that they should not have purchased, that had nothing to do with the purpose of the organization, and then they had to resign in disgrace. I know of people who have misused even products of the school. For instance, I know several principals who misused an organizational cell phone. They were provided a cell phone as the leader of the school district, and then they used it inappropriately by taking pictures and sending inappropriate texts to staff members, and it ultimately cost them their job, and they resigned in disgrace. So this is a critical area, and we don't have the time to talk about the ethics that are involved in this. That was another presentation I did back in July that dealt with leadership ethics, and certainly see Dr. Esperone if you want that presentation. I'm sure that she or Diego, our fine technical assistant, will provide that video for you. But this is an area that we must take great care in to be sure that we are not only using the resources we have wisely, but we are using it ethically, and that we are tracking what we're doing so that we are getting the best possible outcome for the money that we have been provided. Procurement is a word that you may not be familiar with. It is a rather formalized word. So you will hear me oftentimes refer to procurement and purchasing in the same sentence, because basically purchasing is procurement. Now, I've given you the definition here on this particular slide that says that procurement is an act. So it's an action. It's a verb. In one sense, the act of obtaining or buying goods and services. It's also a noun because it's a thing, procurement, but it's a process that includes preparation and the processing, a demand, as well as the end receipt and approval of payment. So when we look at procurement, I've identified 11 steps that are involved in this process. And these steps kind of make it somewhat complicated. We're going to take those steps and break them down, I think, into groups of steps that might make it a little bit easier for you to follow. But you'll see on this slide that procurement involves the purchase planning and standards determination. We'll talk about what that is, as well as specification development. Big words, but I'll make it as easy as I can for you. And then it involves researching the suppliers and selecting the supplier. Also looking at value analysis. making sure this will go more into the making sure we're getting the best possible price for what we're buying, how we finance it. Then we'll talk about price negotiation a little bit, making the purchase, supply contract administration. How are we going to manage contracts if we have contracts? And then inventory control, how we keep track of the things we've already purchased. And lastly, how do we dispose of products that we no longer need? All of those are involved in the procurement process. What I'm going to do now is to try to kind of break this down, I think, in a way that might be easier for you to understand.
Procurement or purchasing is a very detailed process. It involves something as small as buying a box of pencils or a package of paper, or as complex as a service contract or even a capital expenditure on a new building. The question that you might ask is, why is the process so formalized here in the United States? And that reason and the answer is simply that we're dealing with public money. That is, money that comes from the taxpayers. And it is our job as school officials to ensure that the money that is given to us from the taxpayer is used wisely and efficiently. We also have to guarantee that the process that we use to purchase goods and services is fair to all of the vendors. Because there are many people who want to do business with schools and with governmental entities. And we want to make sure that everyone is treated the same. No one is given any special treatment or special access to that organization. So what I want to do in this presentation is to present a more simplified process as to how it's done here in the United States. Now, I must caution you that procurement in the United States is done a little differently in each state. They may have different amounts that require different levels of authorization. They may have different processes for the payment of invoices, but basically there are 4 activities that take place when it comes to procuring a product for a classroom or a service for a school or school district. On the next slide, we'll look at those 4 activities.
I can tell you that I am not a procurement specialist, but I have a lot of experience in the purchasing of goods and even accounts payable as a school principal. Now, I worked in small schools, so I kind of had to do all of this myself with the help of a secretary. So when I look at the process for procurement, depending on the size of the organization, this process can be very complex. I can tell you that at Troy University, the process is very complex, and it's managed remotely, which means that where I'm located, the procurement process doesn't happen. It happens about an hour away, 45, 50 miles away, with another person in another office. And they have whole departments of people that handle accounts receivable and accounts payable and the purchasing of products. So what I've tried to do is kind of synthesize what happens in public organizations like a school or a university. How does this process work? And I've broken it down, as I've said, into 4 basic activities. And the first activity deals with purchase planning. What happens before you order the product? So 2 of these processes take place before the purchase. 1 of them takes place after the purchase. And the 4th one deals with just the purchase itself. So when we look at purchase planning, we're going to look at some things that have to be accomplished as a part of that planning. And we'll look at those in more detail. Then we'll look at choosing the vendor, how we make that decision, how we decide who to give that business to. And in most organizations, this process is very rigid. It's not just, I want to go see that guy down the street and buy it from down the street, or I want to go to that store out at the mall. No, it's much more formalized than that. And we'll talk about vendor lists and bid processes and pricing and all of those kinds of things. Then we'll talk about purchasing. That's the real act itself of placing the order and then managing any contracts that might be part of the purchase, as well as making payments for the things that we've ordered. And then lastly is the control of inventory. How do we manage those assets? There are certainly things that are consumable. Pencils, paper, markers, staples, whatever, paper clips, those are consumable. But then there are other things that are going to be used year after year. So a laptop computer, a book, may be used multiple years. And then the laptop may no longer work, or it's outdated, and it really doesn't help us. And so then we have to think about, well, how do we get rid of it? We don't just put it in the trash. We don't just give it to somebody to take home. We have to make sure that item is systematically disposed of and then taken off the inventory of the school. So we know what happened to that laptop. Well, that laptop broke and its parts were no longer useful, so it was recycled, and this is what happened. It's no longer here, and that's where it went. It didn't go to John's house or Mary's house. It was disposed of according to the organizational policy. So let's look at these 4 activities individually now. In the planning phase, we begin with the need. Now, this need may be an actual budgeted item from the budget of the school, and therefore we order it because it's in the budget to be ordered. Curriculum, salaries, things like that. Those are things that we've budgeted for, so we're going to spend those. But in most purchasing, it is not necessarily specified in the budget that we're to spend money on a particular item. So what we're going to be talking about in procurement in this session is the things that we've budgeted for but not specifically named. So we have budgeted money for office supplies or notebooks or binders or something. We've authorized the purchase of a generic category of things. And then teacher A comes to us and says, I need a package of pencils. Okay, so then it is the purchasing officer's responsibility to make sure that need aligns with the vision and mission of the organization, aligns with the budget. Because really, when the budget has been approved, then we already know that the purchases within it align to the mission of the organization. They should. Now, we may not take the time to match every budget expenditure to the mission of the organization or an objective of the organization, but really, if we are doing this the right way, we'll do that so that anybody can look at, why did you purchase those pencils? Well, we purchased those pencils because we need them for this activity, which is a part of our vision, which is related to the vision of the school or the organization. It's that detailed. Yep, it sure is. So the job of the purchasing officer is to make sure that the need is valid. We really do need this item. And maybe the purchasing officer doesn't know what this item he's ordering is used for. So he's going to have to get information to be sure that what is being ordered is really needed and that it doesn't already exist somewhere in the school and we just forgot about it, which again leaps ahead to why inventory is so important. In big organizations, it's very easy to lose track of purchasing and ordering things 2 and 3 times and then realize, oh, we've already ordered it. We didn't need to spend the money on this thing. So that's why knowing the need is important and aligning that need with both vision and mission. And then secondly, looking at the cost analysis. And this really deals with how much are we spending? What is the best price we can get for this? How much should this particular item cost us? And then third, looking at specifications. What does the teacher really need? Now, if they need number 2 pencils because they're doing a Scantron test that requires them to darken in circles, and then it's put into a machine that reads those darkened circles, and it's got to be a particular pencil. It's got to be a certain size of a pencil, because in the early childhood grades, kindergarten, first grade, sometimes they use those thicker pencils because they're easier for the kids to hold. Well, if that's what you want, then a thin pencil's not going to meet your specification. So it's important on the person who initiates the purchase to explain the specifications of the item that they're looking for. So here's a personal example. Recently I was ordering some envelopes that I needed to mail out some marketing material. And I specified the size of these envelopes. They had to be 7 inches by at least 10.5 inches. That was the dimensions they had to be. And so my department chair came to me and asked me, well, why do you need these envelopes? We've got envelopes here. Why these particular ones? And so I showed him the marketing item that I was going to send out. And I said, you see, it won't fit in a smaller envelope. It's 7 inches by 10 inches. It's got to have a large enough envelope so I can slip it in there. So see, specifications are important. He could have gotten me some business envelopes. It would not have helped me because I needed a specific size. That's why specifications are so important. And really, then in the planning process, you identify each of these areas so that you can get the right item for the people who need it. Another part of this planning process deals with some vendor research. And we look at what's called value analysis. And what this does, when we do a value analysis, is we examine the cost of individual items to determine the true total cost of the goods and services that we are requesting. So I've given you an example here of a laptop. Well, when you purchase a laptop, you not only are purchasing the hardware, the laptop itself, but you're also having to purchase software for it, particular software that you need. That's an additional cost. So if the laptop costs you $500, that's not its true total cost, because you have to factor in how much is the software going to cost us. And then the next item might be infrastructure. We might have to have more electrical outlets. We might have to have increased wiring so this laptop can access the internet in a classroom or in a computer lab. But then also, there's the maintenance on this laptop. We need to look at how much is it going to cost us to maintain this laptop. Make sure the updates are put on it. Make sure the software is checked. Make sure that it's backed up on a regular basis. When you factor in these 4 aspects of the purchase, you get the true total cost. And then you can look at vendors equally. And so you're not just looking at the laptop vendor, you're looking at the person providing the software. And possibly, if you go to vendor B, you might get a better deal on the true total cost because you've looked at all 4 of these items and compared vendor to vendor to vendor. For instance, you may go to a vendor that only provides the laptop and maybe some maintenance. Well, their price may be very, very cheap, but then when you factor in, if I have to add the software, which I'm going to need to use it, plus the infrastructure, well, then their price may be too high. So that's why, as a purchasing officer, you need to make sure you know the true total cost of what it is that you're buying. And it's not just as simple as buying a package of pencils, because, a package of number 2 pencils may be cheaper here, a few cents cheaper here, or a few cents cheaper there. But it does help you to do value analysis when you're dealing with more expensive items, and typically items that are not consumable. like pencils and paper, but maybe a copier, a scanner, a telephone, or in this case, even a computer. A second aspect of researching the vendor is looking at financing. Part of the responsibility of the purchasing agent, whether that's the principal or a clerk, involves determining the best time and method to pay for the goods and services based on the requirements of the vendor. Remember that this presentation looks at not only the right product, but the right time to order it, as well as the right time to pay for it. Now, I've given you some examples here that things to think about. There may be options to lease a particular piece of equipment, and many schools do that here, versus buy it outright. Because some equipment, becomes obsolete really quickly. And then if you're buying this very expensive piece of equipment, you're having to pay for that equipment outright. And then when it becomes old and doesn't work, how do you get rid of it? What do you do with it? And it just goes into a storeroom. And I'm thinking here along the lines of like a photocopier. Now, your schools may not use photocopiers very often, but our schools do. And teachers are copying documents for the students and curriculum items for students. And so many schools don't want to purchase a photocopier for their school that has lots of things that it does, stapling and two-sided copying and sorting and all of that. They may find it better to lease the item than paper, because the price may be cheaper in the long run to lease it versus own it outright, because there may be a time at the end of the lease that you can turn the equipment in and get new equipment and get better equipment or get upgraded equipment. Then, of course, you've got issues about, do I pay for it with a purchase order? Does the company take purchase orders, which means that I can submit that order to an organization, to a business, and they will send me the goods and then an invoice, and then I pay that invoice. It gives me 30 days to pay it, or 45 days, depending on the vendor. Or do I have to use an organizational check? And I'm not sure how many schools in the Philippines use checks, probably not very many, but checks are very common here in the United States, where a business will accept a government check to pay for that item. And basically, a check is just a demand for payment, as opposed to a debit card, or in this case, you see here, a credit card. And many schools have them, and they have credit cards for very specific purposes, to buy certain items, where they can take that credit card and purchase what they need, and then pay the credit card bill at the end of the month. A final way that some schools pay for things, and it depends on the vendor, but they will pay what's called COD, cash on delivery. And in some organizations, that's all they will take. It is not as common today as it once was. Most businesses will not do cash on delivery, because, again, that puts their drivers and their delivery systems a little bit at risk for being robbed. So it's oftentimes better to pay it via a credit, a debit, or a check, or a purchase order, because that way the person just has to deliver it. But that is still a way that many places pay for it. And that may be one of the terms in the financing of purchases. The final aspects of vendor research involve pricing. And remember, the goal of the purchasing agent is to get not only the right price, the right item, but to get it at the right price. And so sometimes this is controlled by administrative rules, where the school itself has negotiated a price. But more often than not, here in the United States, the state government has negotiated with businesses who want to do business with the schools or the government a set price. Now, depending on the cost of the item, you may not have to use one of the approved vendors. For instance, most of our K-12 schools, if the purchase is less than $750, they can buy it locally. and buy it at the store down the street. But for items that cost more than $750, they are required to go to the approved vendor list and buy it from that vendor. And that vendor list will have the listing of all the companies that have completed the process to do business with the state or the government, and it includes contact information for the business, the fixed price for those items, any payment terms, delivery terms, and product specifications. And then the school can go to that list and know that when they're ordering computers or books or whatever it may be, they are going to get it for that price. Usually items on the approved vendor list are cheaper than you can get them locally. And the reason that the vendors do that is because they know that once they are on that list, that they can do business with lots of schools throughout the state, have a lot more business. Now, it is not easy to get on that list. There's a lot of steps that you have to follow. We call them hoops. You have to jump through to get on that list. But once you're on that list, then oftentimes you have a lot more business. So you are able to lower your price because, again, you want to do business with the government. But there's also another process that is similar to this vendor list, but it's called the bid process. Now, we use this in the United States for large capital expenditures. For instance, when schools are buying buses, or districts, I should say, are buying school buses to transport the children, it's not like the Philippines where a company will provide a very small vehicle. We call it a small vehicle, like a jeepney-sized vehicle, and it will transport kids from the school to a particular location. Our school buses pick kids up at very set places throughout a particular route. And these buses are as big as one of the Victory liners. They're not the same type of vehicle, but they're about the size of a Victory liner. They'll handle 60 passengers. And so to buy one of those buses, they're very, very expensive to buy. The school districts and the state in general have bid out with a company. One of the main companies here that provide buses is a company called Bluebird. And the Bluebird company has contracted with the state to provide school buses. And the specifications on the color and all the safety equipment that has to be on it, the lights and the signage and so forth, that's all been determined. So that when a school district needs to replace one of its buses, and we're talking well over $100,000 to buy one of these buses, that they go to this list and they can say, I want to buy this bus and know it's going to cost this much money. So it's usually a large capital expenditure, and or it may be construction related that a bid has to be taken. And so a district will solicit, that means ask people to submit bids to build a building. And the bid is basically just an offer to complete the work for a set price within a set time frame with certain specifications being met. And usually the school district will have architectural plans that they have had drawn up for the building of a school. And the construction companies will then look at those plans and they will submit a bid saying, we can build this building for $75 million, and we'll have it done in a year and 5 months. And we will have this much done at this time, and so forth and so on. And then basically, at the time that the bids are open, because those are called sealed bids, then the school district looks at all the bids and chooses the one that is the lowest bid, because that's the way it works. It's the lowest bid that you have to reach. Now, in some cases, the district will provide a threshold bid. In other words, they will say that the bids have to be under a set amount of money. So For instance, they may say that the cost of this building can be no more than $75 million. And then they will look at all the bids that are $75 million and less. And anybody who's bidding on that price has to know that they cannot go over the $75 million because that causes problems. And then if you have those kind of overruns, over costs, then it gets somebody into trouble. So this is another way that schools procure items is through bids that they accept from companies and also through an approved vendor lists. Let's turn our attention to the third activity in the procurement process, which is actually purchasing. This is the let's go shopping part of the process. And you see the guy here running a credit card or a debit card through a machine. Here in the United States, most purchasing is accomplished through a purchase order. And a purchase order is simply a commercial document with an official offer from a buyer to a seller to buy specific products at a set or agreed upon price and in certain quantities. Now, we use purchase orders to control purchases so that people don't go to the store to buy one thing and come back to school with something different. Also, a purchase order helps us in that approvals to purchase are obtained at the beginning before the products are ordered. And so when it comes time to pay them, the checks can be cut, the money can be transferred immediately. Now, some purchase orders are very specific, and they will say quantity 50, item number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then here's a description and here's the price. Other purchase orders are what we call open-ended purchase orders. In other words, they are for generic items, but what we have set is a maximum amount to spend. I have one here on my desk right now, and it's a purchase order to a local office supply store. I needed to buy some envelopes to mail some photos out. Well, these photos are 12 inches by 20 inches. So I needed a special size envelope. Instead of getting a specific purchase order for 12 by 20 envelopes, because I wasn't sure I was going to use envelopes, I thought about using a mailing roll. I asked the purchasing officer to leave it open-ended. And I told her I'm not going to spend any more than $200 on these envelopes because I got to buy a lot of them. So she set the purchase order for a maximum of $200 to a specific store called Office Depot. It's an office supply store. And so I take that purchase order to the store. I found what I wanted, and I picked up those items, and I went to the cashier to check out. And I handed her the purchase order, and it's on university letterhead, and it's got all the information that this person needs in order for me to buy this item. It's got a number that ties this purchase order to a particular purchase. And basically what this purchase order does is it authorizes me to spend organizational money on this thing that I need. Purchase orders are great because they really do facilitate payment. There's no delay with a purchase order because when the seller has provided the items and he sent his invoice, there's no other signatures or authority that's needed to make the payment. The invoice is paid immediately because the invoice references a purchase order number. And that purchasing person looks at that and says, oh yeah, here, this invoice is for this purchase order. So I matched the invoice to the purchase order, and I said, oh yeah, I got to write out a check for $74.50. And they write the check, put it in an envelope, and send it to the seller. So purchase orders definitely can facilitate that process. And this is the most common way schools here in the United States procure items. A second aspect of purchasing is contract administration. There are many times in purchasing where we are not necessarily buying a particular product, but we are buying a service from an outside vendor. And so we see contracts used in schools for service contracts or memberships. And here at Troy University, we have many service contracts, but ones that are very common. We have a service contract with a company called Rico, and they provide us our copiers and our mailroom. And so every department or college has a photocopier, and they're Rico copiers. They're very expensive. I think we probably spend $40,000 or $50,000 a month just on photocopying services. And this company provides us with top-end photocopiers. They maintain them. They fix them when they're broken. They provide us the paper that we use in them. So that we don't worry about that. We just write them a check for $50,000 a month or whatever it is, and they make sure that every department, every college at the university has a photocopier that's working. They also provide us our mailroom services. So their people deliver the mail within the university or between campuses, because our campuses are about an hour from each other. So somebody drives up to the home campus and picks up mail and takes it back here to Dothan, and somebody drives from Montgomery to the home campus or vice versa. So they make sure the mail gets delivered within the university. Because in our system, the United States mail comes to the university to one main room, and then there's a person in that room who delivers it to the various departments. And schools have that same type of service where the U.S. mail comes to their school. Now, they may not have a service contract on their copier, but I think probably that's very rare if they don't. Most schools have a service contract to make sure the copier continues to work. Also at the university, we have a contract with another provider called Sodexo, and this company provides grounds care. They cut the grass, they trim the trees, they kind of clean up the leaves that kind of fall off the trees, because our campuses have lots of grass. They're not in city locations, so somebody has to mow the grass, and because we're talking about large tracts of land, they use large equipment to do it. They also provide custodial services, so our buildings are clean. And schools, while they may hire somebody or hire an organization to provide that, they use that contract to make sure that everybody knows what they will do. Now, in our public schools, the lunches are provided by a local company and then delivered to the school. So the kids get breakfast and lunch at their school, depending on their income. Or if they just want to purchase a breakfast at the school, they can do that. And that is provided by a local company here. But there's a contract that outlines the terms of what the buyer will do and what the seller will do. And these contracts have to be managed to make sure that the seller is doing exactly what he or she said she would do. And it's also the responsibility of the seller to watch what the buyer is doing to make sure they're paying on time and fulfilling their obligation. So this management is something that is done both by buyer and seller to make sure everybody's doing what they agreed to do.
When it comes to payment for goods and services, it is up to the purchasing officer to inform the accounts payable department or person the terms of the account. Now, in many schools, that accounts payable person or department may just be one person, and it may be the purchasing officer who has the responsibility for that. Or it may be a clerk that does it. But whoever does it, the purchasing officer has to make sure that all of the invoices are paid on time. The accounts payable department will process the invoices for payment, and it's still their job to make sure that the vendors are paid on time for the products and services that they have provided. Communication between the purchasing officer and the accounts payable person is critical. It must be clear as to what is to be paid and that everything that was ordered was received and delivered to the person who initiated the order. No payment should be made before the products have been received or delivered. And if they were partially delivered, then only partial payment made for the invoice. Again, that's important for an organization that deals with public money, is that you don't want to be paying for things that you haven't received or paying for things that were not correctly delivered. And that's not unusual when you order a product and they're out of stock. Well, you don't pay the whole invoice. If it's out of stock, you pay for the items that have been received. And then when they all have been received, you pay for it, or you pay as they come, depending on the terms of the account.
The final activity of the procurement process is inventory. And I've broken that down into really three aspects for you. The first is inventory management, then the second is inventory transfer, and the final is inventory disposal. So let's start with inventory management. Sometimes this is called asset management. And basically what is taking place with inventory management is that we know what we have and we know where it's being stored so that we can find it when we need it. And this includes both consumables, papers, pencils, tape, whatever, as well as the non-consumables, laptops, chairs, desks, chalkboards, bulletin boards, books, whatever, things that you're going to keep around. Somebody's got to keep track of these items. And you say, well, why is that? Because these items are bought with public money. So we have to know where they are at all times. So and there's software that does this, and it's not something that is a lot of work. Schools use software to maintain their list of inventory. Inventory management is important, as I said prior to this, because we don't want to waste money on buying things 2 and 3 times if we only need them once. So why buy extra pencils when you have enough pencils? Why buy extra desks when you only need so many? So again, it helps you to be efficient with your money. The second aspect of inventory management, or just inventory in general, is how to transfer items, moving equipment from one department or person to another. So one department no longer needs these desks or these desk chairs. They don't want to throw them away. They're still in very good use. So instead of wasting money on buying new chairs or desks, what happens is the inventory control people say, wow, we have these desks. We're going to store them in a warehouse or in a special place so that when someone says to us, wow, I need a desk. Got a new person starting? Got to have a desk. Okay. We go to our inventory and say, wow, we've got this desk. Here are the specifications. It's got so many drawers. It's this color. It's this shape. We don't need to buy a new one. Let's take this desk and give it to this new person. Again, it's the wise use of resources. So when we talk about fiscal management, we're saying, listen, we don't have a lot of money, we don't have a lot of resources, so we've got to take good care of the ones that we do have. And so we do that through managing the inventory and transferring it to where it's needed. As well as if someone says, I no longer need this item anymore, but somebody else may need it, it gets transferred from me, so it's not taking up space where I'm at, and it's given to somebody who could really use it. So it's not only getting it to people who need it, but taking it away from people who no longer need it. But then there comes a time when that item is no longer needed by anybody in the organization. What do you do with equipment that's no longer needed by anyone? Or what do you do with equipment that no longer works? You just can't throw it away because it is an asset. It is something of value. It is something that was purchased with government money, taxpayer dollars. So you have a process to dispose of those items, and Troy has a very efficient process. A form is filled out identifying the item to be disposed. and then an inventory number on the back of that item is removed so that the person who's managing the inventory says, yep, this item was disposed of, and here's the reason it was disposed. It was disposed because it no longer works. Then that item is transferred to a place where they are disposed of, and there's a process for it. So computer equipment at Troy University is disposed of by sending it to a recycle firm. But what they do is someone removes the hard drive from the equipment. Then the laptop is sent to that recycler, and they do what they do to get whatever they can out of it. The hard drive is physically destroyed. So that way, if there's any information on that computer that could possibly be retrieved, it is physically damaged, destroyed, so no one can get anything out of it. And then that item is sent to a recycler, and they melt it down and make new hard drives or whatever they make out of them. So there is a process for the management of inventory. So you see, even a part of the procurement is not just acquiring items, products, goods, but it's also the disposing of them when they're no longer needed. So there is a front end on this as well as a back end on this. And this is how we get rid of the things that we get rid of. And this is really the fourth activity in procurement. Now let's change complete directions from procurement to record management. And this is really the back half of procurement, because procurement gets us the item and it generates lots of documents as a part of this obtaining of goods and services. But we have to manage those documents to maintain transparency so that we can show the public, should they ask, how their money was spent. And they have a right to know how the money was spent. So I've broken this down really into three phases, three questions. The first question is, what do I keep? What records really need to be kept? And that will change from organization to organization, government entity to government entity. But speaking generally, here's what you need to keep. And I've put a little picture here. They're very hard to see, I realize. But the first thing that needs to be kept is a copy of the purchase order itself. And so you see an image of the purchase order. Then, when the item was delivered, or items were delivered, there'll usually be a packing slip. A slip that says, this is what we ordered, and this is what the items that were, how many of that thing was delivered to you, and the date it was delivered. And usually, the packing slip is a carbonless form, so you can write on it and it will make a copy. The delivery person will keep a copy, and then the school will get a copy. And then your job is to verify in the box that everything the packing slip says is in there is actually in there. Then an invoice will come. Sometimes the invoice comes right with the shipment itself. Sometimes it comes in a separate envelope. And then it is the job of the purchasing agent to verify that the invoice is correct based on what was ordered, what was delivered, to make sure that the price is correct, just like it was said. And so we keep a copy of the invoice. Now, because here in the United States we use checks a lot to pay invoices instead of credit cards, instead of debit cards, we use checks, governmental checks. And so when a check is sent, most organizations have a copy of the check, the canceled check. And a canceled check is once it's gone through the bank, once it's given to the person the vendor, they will deposit it in their checking account. That check is canceled. It means it cannot be used again. It can only be used the one time, deposited one time. And then what happens is that vendor's bank will send that canceled check back to the bank that issued it, and then that's usually the buyer's bank, and then that buyer will be given a copy of that check. And then it is the job of the purchasing agent to match the check to the invoice to the packing slip to the purchase order, and staple all of that together and file it. I suggest that you file your invoices by the vendor, not by what they're purchasing. So I wouldn't file it by curriculum, I'd file it by vendor. But certainly if you want to double file, you can do that by vendor and by item. So I've got a file for office supplies. And then I could break office supplies down by vendor. I could then have curriculum and then break down curriculum by vendor, furniture by vendor. So there's a lot of ways you can organize it and keep track of these things. But the idea is these are the basic things that you need to keep. Now, if there's any letters that are written in relation to these items here, the purchase order, the invoice, whatever, disputing the charges, then that correspondence should be kept with the invoice as well, so that if there's ever a question, you can go to your filing cabinet, pull out that specific file for that vendor, and you can see everything you need to see right there. The next question in the procurement records management process is, so how long do you keep these records? Because very quickly in a large organization, these records can pile up every month. More things are piling up, and you end up having more paper than you know what to do with. The general rule of thumb here in the United States is that you keep things for a minimum of 7 years and probably no more than 10 years. And the 7 years is not a magical number, but it is a number that is oftentimes used because here in the United States, our Bureau of Internal Revenue, what you call the BIR, ours is called the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, they will only do audits for up to 7 years. After 7 years, they can no longer, by law, audit an organization for taxes and how the money was spent. Now, because schools are non-profit, non-tax, they still use this 7-year model. In other words, they keep the records for 7 years. After 7 years, the documents are shredded because they are of no longer any value. No one's going to come back and say, wait a minute, 27 years ago, how did you spend that money? That just doesn't happen. 7 years is really what I would say the minimum. Some places say, well, we're going to keep them up to 10 years, but it varies by organization. In my own personal life, and in most individuals' life, they will keep records like that for 7 years, and then they'll discard them and destroy them in an appropriate way. Most organizations here will shred them so that nobody can get personal confidential information. And there are actually companies that provide a document shredding service so that you don't have to worry about shredding them yourself. They have a machine that they just put these documents in and it just shreds them so that they can't even be read by anybody. Now, the final question in records management deals with, so how do we store it? How do we keep it? So that we have these records for 7 years. Now, I recommend that you have some kind of fireproof cabinet. Fireproof, and in the Philippines, even a waterproof cabinet. It's very common here, and I've got some pictures of the storage methods. So, yeah, you store them in a fireproof cabinet. That way, if the building catches on fire, no matter what, your financial records are safe. If there's a flood, these cabinets are waterproof, so your records are maintained. I also say that you should keep these documents electronically. Keep them on your computer, on your desktop. And typically this is done by scanning documents into an electronic format, into a PDF, and that's a personal digital file. And then it's stored on the computer, so that if you should need to access them, you have them on your own laptop. But to be safe, I would not only store them on site in a fireproof, waterproof cabinet on my laptop. Thirdly, I would store them in the cloud in a very secure server. So you store them off-site. So if someone steals your laptop, or your laptop is destroyed in a flood and your physical documents are destroyed, you have them stored in the cloud somewhere, on the internet somewhere, and there are companies that will store them for you in very, very secure places, so that you know that you can get access to them. Many companies here in the United States were not prepared for a recent hurricane that hit. This is Hurricane Katrina that hit New Orleans. And so what happened is they had their paper copy, but they also had their electronic copy. But what happens if your laptop is destroyed? Well, they lost very important company records. And so what happened in the years since Katrina, and it's been 7 or 8 years now since Katrina, companies have sprung up that provide these off-site storage facilities where you can electronically upload. Now, the old-fashioned way of off-site storage was to store it in a safety deposit box at a local bank. Not as common anymore, and mainly it's because the records themselves have become so large, it isn't feasible to store them that way. But it may be a way if you have a local bank, and I'm not sure how much our schools use local banks anymore, but they do store them off-site at the central office, or they store them off-site in an electronic format. So this is a way to store your records. Remember, this is all about transparency, making sure that you can find the documents you need when you need them and have proof of what you've spent.
This workshop has provided you with the basic principles of procurement or purchasing. I've discussed with you why this process is so formalized. We're dealing with taxpayer monies, and I've tried to simplify the basic steps of the process. What I've told you is how purchasing is accomplished here in the United States. The purchasing process is applicable to the Philippines also. Much of how schools procure goods and services are controlled by administrative rule. And these rules ensure that all districts and schools are purchasing and paying for their goods and services the same way, and also in a timely fashion. A process like this makes it easier to do business with the governmental organization or the government directly. It ensures that no business will receive more favorable or special treatment. Everyone is treated equally. I also discussed the record-keeping process for procurement. In an age when people do not trust government organizations because the corruption of the people running them, it is all the more important that we document procurement activities. We show the public that every dollar we spent was according to the budget and was paid to the appropriate vendor. No special favors or kickbacks were provided to entice us to give the government's business to a friend or a relative. Now, my leadership mentor told me when I first became a school principal, the fastest way to lose your job or end up in jail is to mismanage the taxpayers' money. That's the reason that this training is so important. And I hope that, even though it's been brief, I hope that you've been able to see this process and how you can ensure that you are handling the Filipino taxpayers' public money efficiently and transparently.
It's now time for me to bring this presentation to a close. Here's how you can contact me should you have any questions or want to talk further about procurement and record keeping. My name is listed here. I'm an associate professor at Troy University. My email contact is davisr@troy.edu. That's davisr@troy.edu. I've enjoyed being with you in this session in Bayambang, Nueva Vizcaya, Philippines. Look forward to seeing you in the future. Have a great day.